Morning, kids. Afternoon, I mean. All right. Hey, Jeremiah. Hey, Katie. Hey, Keisha. We're going to get started. We are switching concepts over to volume. So we're going to start our geometry part of the curriculum. Let me pull up what I had here. Hold on. All right. Okay. More specifically, we're going to be solving volume of cylinders. So today is Cinco de Mayo 2020. Okay, I'm going to give you the formula right up front so we can reference it as we go along. The volume of a cylinder is equal to pi r squared times the height. Pi r squared is part of another formula. Let's go ahead and draw this. So here's my cylinder. To draw a cylinder, you draw like this. You draw a oval circle, and then below it you draw an identical oval circle, or try to be as close as you can, and then you connect the edges. That wasn't very good. Okay, and then in the middle of there you can draw your radius. Okay, so this is the radius, this is also the radius, this is the height. The height goes from here to here. Alright, so this is the volume of this cylinder, pi r squared times height. What else, where else have you heard pi r squared? Yeah, you've seen those in spheres. Think more basic. It actually comes from the area of the circle. And in fact, this part of it is the area of the circle here. So this part of it comes from the circle base. That's this space here. Okay? And the height is actually this space here. Can you mute yourself, please? Kylie, please mute yourself. Thank you. All right. So when we're using this formula, know that this portion of the formula is actually the area of this base here. So what we're doing is we're finding the area of the base, and then we are multiplying it times its height. So we're finding the area of this base, and then we are multiplying it by its height. So think of it like a stack of coins.
Strawberry banana.
All right. So if I have 1/4, right? This is a quarter. it's actually, a quarter is a cylinder, but ignore that for a second. Just imagine that a quarter's two-dimensional, like just a plane. All right. If I found the area of that and then stacked another quarter on the top of that, how would I find the volume of those two quarters? Well, I would multiply the area of the first quarter by 2. Well, what if I did a third quarter? Well, then I would multiply the area of that bottom quarter by 3, because there's 3 quarters now, right? Well, what if I did like 10 quarters? Would I have to find the area of each individual quarter and add them all together? No. You would just find the area of the bottom quarter, and then you would multiply it by how many quarters there are, or how tall it was. Okay, so that's how we're doing this. We're going to find the area of the base, which is a circle, and then we're going to multiply it by the height. So basically we're finding how all of the, if we stack this as just a bunch of bases. A cylinder is like a soda can. Okay? So this is a cylinder, or cylinder-like. If we found the area of the base and then multiplied it by how tall the can was, that would find the volume of the cylinder. Alright. So now let's find some volumes of some cylinders. Alright, so let's say that this is 15 and that the radius is 7. That's fine. I really need a calculator for this. I don't have one because I'm using my phone to record. Alright, so the first thing you're going to do in finding volume of the cylinder is you're going to write out the formula. Okay, so you're going to write this formula. Volume equals, now, when you guys take standardized tests or whatever, they're not going to give you this formula. They're going to give you this formula. Volume equals capital B for base times the height. Now, this is the same as this, but this B is going to be, the base is a circle. So we can replace this B with this. All right? So we're going to take volume equals base times height, and it's not the same as like a rectangle, because rectangle has a lowercase b. This would be lowercase. So this capital B tells us that the base of this figure is two-dimensional, not one-dimensional. Right. So volume equals pi r squared, which is the base, times height. All right, there's my formula. Once you have the formula, you're going to plug in your values. All right. We're going to leave pi as a symbol. Leave it as the symbol pi until the very end. We might not even need to change it. Okay, so we're going to leave pi as pi. Now, r squared. What is r in this case? 7. And what is my height? 15. Okay. So now we have all of our values input into the formula. Now we're going to take those values and we're going to simplify them. So PEMDAS, we have to do 7 squared first. 7 times 7 is 49. And then 49 times 15. $735. So this is pi times 735. Now we don't want to write it like this. We don't like the pi out front. We like to put it in the back. It's just the way that we write them. So this is actually volume equals 735 pi. Anytime you're dealing with area, distance, volume, you have to put units. I didn't put any units on here, so let me change that mistake now. Let's make this 7 inches and 15 inches. So, this is 7 inches and 15 inches, so at the end you're going to end up with inches, not squared, because squared is for area, it's inches cubed. Now, does this 3 mean that the 735 is cubed? No, it does not mean that. It only means the inches are cubed. All right, that just tells us that it's a 3-dimensional space. All right, so that's your answer. Any questions? Okay, let's change it up. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me write this back. So we had 735 pi, right? So I told you to leave pi as a symbol. Well, it depends on what the question's asking you. So this is if the question asks you to leave it in terms of pi. That means leave pi as a symbol. Okay, so if a question ever tells you to give your answer in terms of pi, that means leave pi as a symbol. All right. Now, if it tells you to round to the nearest hundredths, that means you're going to need to actually multiply it by the decimal expansion of pi. So we would actually, and don't round to 3.14. You want to actually, want to use the pi button in your calculator. All right. So if it wanted it rounded to the nearest hundredths, we would have to multiply pi times 735. Amelia, please mute yourself. Thank you. All right, so if I did that, here, I'm going to share my screen with you so you can see me do this. We're going to do 735 times pi. Okay, so 735, don't multiply it by 3.14 unless you absolutely have to. Find the pi button, and I don't see a pi button on here. Oh, there it is. Times pi. That just wrote out pi, now hit equals. 2309. Now if I'm rounding it to the nearest hundredths, this would be 2309.07. That would be to the nearest hundredth. If it asked me to round it to the nearest tenth, it would be 2309.1. If it asked me to round it to the nearest thousandths, it would be 2309.071. Okay? And it would be inches cubed. Alright. I'm going to stop presenting. Okay. Can you guys see my screen again? Can you guys see all this again? Okay, good. Alright, so these here, these are all rounded answers. This was the nearest hundredth, tenth, thousandth. Okay. Let's do one more of those, just so you're comfortable. I'll do this one quickly. Okay. Here's a cylinder. we'll do meters, and the height is 4 meters. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do is write the formula. Volume equals base times height. You don't have to write that one if you don't want to. You can go straight to volume equals pi r squared height. Okay, so volume equals pi r squared height. So what is my radius here? What's my radius? Some of you might think that it's 10. It is not 10. The radius is 5. Why is the radius 5? Because here, my diameter is given. So if the diameter is 10, then the radius is 5. Because it's half, the radius is half the diameter. Okay? So we're going to use the 5, not the 10. So this is pi 5 squared 4. Volume equals, I'm just going to put the pi in the back. What is 5 squared? 25. 25 times 4 is 100, so this would be 100 pi. Meters cubed. And this is in terms of pi. I'm not going to calculate this out because I know you guys can do this times pi in your calculator and get a number and round it. Okay, so I'm just going to leave all my answers in terms of pi for right now. When you do this for homework, it might ask you to actually round the answers. If it asks you to round the answers, multiply 100 times the pi button in your calculator, not by 3.14, and then round it to whatever they tell you to round it to. If they don't tell you to round it, then I would just leave it in terms of pi. All right. Questions? Okay, so for those problems, we were solving for volume. Let's look at a problem where it's asked us to solve for something else. What if we're solving for height? So the radius will be 3 feet. The height is unknown. But let's say they tell us the volume equals 900, let's just say 900 feet cubed. Okay, so they're going to have to give you two of the 3 pieces of information. So there's volume, radius, and height. They need to give you 2 out of those 3 things. If they give you 2 of them, you can solve for the 3rd one. All right? If they don't, there's nothing you can do. So here we're given the radius and the volume. Now we need to find the height. The good news is we use the same formula we used on the other one. There's my formula. Okay, now when we enter it into the formula, it's going to be a little different. This time we're not solving for V, we're solving for H. All right. So they're telling us what V is. V is 900. Pi is still pi, it's just a constant or a coefficient in this case. The radius is 3 squared, and height is unknown. All right, simplify this. Simplify your 3 squared and you get 9 pi. Or just 9. You can leave the pi out front for now. Okay, now we need to solve for h, which means we need to divide by 9 pi. The pi's are going to cancel, the 9's are going to cancel, and then we're going to be left with h all by itself. So now we just need to figure out, well, what's 900 divided by 9 pi? You don't want to leave pi as a symbol here because it's in the denominator. I guess you could. What's 900 divided by 9? That would be 100, right? So this would be 100 over pi. If they told you to leave your answer in terms of pi, this would be your answer. But let's actually divide that. What's 100 divided by pi? I'll do that for you. 100 divided by pi equals 31.8 approximately. So your height is approximately 31.8 feet. Why is it not feet cubed? Because I'm not talking about volume here. I'm finding a length. And length is one-dimensional, so it's just the units by themselves. So that means this would be about 31.8 feet high. Okay. So we solved for volume. We solved for height. What are we going to solve for next? Yes, the radius. Good. Are there any questions about any of this math I did? Do you guys understand why I divided by 9 pi? I could have divided by 9 first, canceled those, divided it, and then divided by pi. It would have been 2 steps instead of 1. I just combined the steps. You guys good? So now let's solve for the radius. Now this one's going to be a little different. Same formula, but a little bit different process, okay? So here's our sphere. Here's my radius. I don't know what that is. Let's say the volume is, let's go with 28 centimeters cubed. Let's say that the height is 18 centimeters. So if we're given the volume and the height, we got to solve for the radius. So here's how you do it. You set up the same formula. Volume equals pi r squared height. Now instead of, the first thing we did was we had the radius and height, so we put in the radius and the height, solve for volume. Then we had the volume and the height, or the volume and the radius, and solve for h. Now we're going to have the volume and the height, and we're going to solve for this r. The problem with this is r is squared, so we're going to have to deal with the square at the very end. It should be the last step. We're going to take the square root, all right? It's the very last step. So first thing we're going to do is plug this in. This is 28. And the height is 18. Okay, now, what are we going to divide by? So the volume will be given for all problems? No. So the first, Amelia, you might have missed it. The first example I did, the volume wasn't given, but the radius and the height was given. So we just had to simplify the right side of the equation. Just multiply all of it together. We didn't have to actually divide. But some of the problems, the volume will be given. You'll have to solve for the other variables. So the question is, what do I divide both sides by here? What am I trying to isolate? I'm trying to isolate r. So what am I trying to get rid of? Pi and 18. Good. So that's what I'm going to divide by. I'm going to divide by 18 pi. Or pi 18. Either way. So the good news is the right side, these pi's cancel and the 18's cancel, and we're left with r squared equals. Now, we need to do 28 divided by 18 pi. Now, 18 does not go into 28 nicely, so we might as well just divide it out, and I'll show you how I do that. So again, we're dividing 28 by 18 pi. So if I plug in 28 divided by 18 pi, it's not going to work. You have to multiply the pi times the 18 first. you would write that number down, and then you would divide 28 by this number. So this is going to be a pain. All right, let's do this. Let's do 28 divided by, I think I can use parentheses here, 18 times pi. Yeah, so it's, let's say 0.5. So you're gonna have to approximate this sort of. All right, so here's my number. All right, it's 0.5. I'm gonna stop hiding my screen. Okay. All right, so I have the radius squared equals 0.5. I don't want to know what that is. I want to know what just the radius is. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. What's the square root of r squared? Is just r. And r equals here, the square root of 0.5. I'm actually going to use the 0.495187118414552, the number I had on my calculator. I'm just going to take the square root of that. And I get about 0.7. I'm sorry. How is that possible? 0.5. Oh, I squared it by accident. No, I didn't. It's 0.7. Yeah. Yeah, it's 0.7. Okay. It's approximately 0.7. Now, what if the question said not to put, so the radius is 0.7 centimeters. What if they didn't want us to round? What if they wanted an exact answer left in terms of pi? Well, I would have gone back up here to when I had all this, and I would have just said that r squared equals 28 over 18 pi, right? Which simplifies to, what, 14 over 9? 28 over 18 simplifies to 14 over 9 pi, right? So I would have taken the square root of both of those, and I have r is equal to the square root of 14 over 9 pi. Now, I don't anticipate that it would ask you to do this. It'll probably want you to do the decimal expansion, so what we did above. Basically, if you have to leave it in terms of pi, you're going to end up with that fraction. You just are. All right. All right. So now real life application. We have a jar of jelly. And this jar of jelly is only partially filled. We'll call this blueberry jelly. Okay, we've got a jar of jelly that's only filled part way. The question is, what is the volume of the jelly in the jar? Okay, so we're going to need a couple of things. First, we're going to need to know the radius or diameter of the jar. If the diameter is some number, just divide it in half. So let's say this is 6. No, let's use something realistic here. Let's say it's 2.5 inches. So the radius is 2.5 inches. And let's say the height of the jar is 6 inches. Okay. And let's say that there is the space here and here we measured, and let's say there's 4 inches there. Okay. So we know the radius of the jar, we know the height of the jar, and we know the height of the empty space in the jar. So the question is how we find the volume of just the jelly. How much jelly is in that jar? Alright, so let's start out with the formula. First thing we're going to do is we're going to find the volume of the actual jar. Ignore the jelly. Then we're going to find the volume of the empty space. And if we know the volume of the jar and we know the volume of the empty space, if we subtract the volume of the empty space from the volume of the jar, that will leave us with just the volume of the jelly. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to subtract the volume of the empty space, the volume of the jar minus the volume of the empty space, and that's going to give us the volume of the jelly. Okay, so let's follow that sequence. We're going to need to find 2 volumes and then subtract them. So let's find the volume of the jar. Volume, can you guys see this down? Yeah, you can see that. Let me make sure I can see that on my camera. Yep. Volume equals pi r squared height. Alright, now the volume of the jar, we're ignoring all the inside stuff. We're just looking at the height of the jar and the radius of the jar. So volume equals pi times 2.5 squared times 6. So volume equals, I'm going to do the calculations off screen. You're not going to see them. But we're going to do 2.5 squared time, which is 6.25, and then times 6, which is 37.5. And notice that the pi is still there. I'm going to leave it in terms of pi because it's going to make my calculation easier in the end, because the other one's going to be in terms of pi, and then we'll just subtract them. Okay. Alright, so let's do the volume of I'm going to do this one in red just so it looks different. Volume of empty space. Now Now, the volume of the empty space is, it's like cutting the cylinder in half, right? So imagine you put a saw and cut through the jar of jelly, and now there's the jelly side and then the empty side. So it's everything in here, where the red is, okay? So it's 4 inches tall, and it's got the same radius of 2.5. So volume equals pi r squared height. Volume equals pi times 2.5 squared times 4. Let me do this calculations off screen. 2.5 squared times 4. It's 25 even. 25 pi. Okay. So now I have the volume of the jar, which is 37.5 pi. The volume of just the empty space, which is 25 pi. Now how do I find the volume of the jam, or just the blue space? I subtract these two numbers, and you're going to end up with 12.5. So down here, volume of the jam is equal to 37.5 pi minus 25 pi, which equals 12.5 pi inches cubed. Now notice what I did. Do you see how I did not cancel out these two pi's? They don't cancel because you're not subtracting the pi's. So if I did 10x minus 5x, what do you end up with? You end up with 5x. Or if I did 10x minus 2x, you'd end up with 8x. The x's don't cancel. Only when you're combining terms with like variables, think of pi as a variable, you don't cancel the variables, you just keep the variable the same, all right? And you just subtract the coefficients, in this case 37.5 and 25. So 37.5 pi minus 25 pi equals 12.5 pi. And then I just tack on inches cubed because it's volume. All right. Last problem. What happens if there's different units? Okay. Okay. Think of this as a water jug. You guys seen those water jugs they put on top of those bases at like doctor's offices and stuff? Anyways, it's upside down in the wall. You just push the spindle. All right, so think of this as a big jug of water. Okay. Let's say the height of this jug, they don't fill up the top part, so we're only looking at this part here. Let's say that this is 1.25 feet. I'm going to write it up here. Height is 1.25 feet. And let's say that the radius is say the diameter is 1 foot. Okay. So we've got the height, which is 1.25, and we've got the diameter, which is a foot, 1 foot. Okay, so if the diameter is a foot, what is the radius? 0.5 feet. Yeah, good. Okay, so if the question is asking you how many gallons of water can be held in this tank, we don't have our units in gallons. These are measured by feet. So what we have to do is at the end of the problem, once we have our answer in inches cubed, we need to convert that to gallons. So it's the same process as we've just done over the last 3 examples, but at the very end, we're going to have to change our units into gallons. So once we have something inches cubed, or feet cubed, we need to change that to gallons, cubic gallons. Okay, so we're going to have to do a conversion at the very end. All right, now we have 2 options. We can leave this as feet, or we could change it to inches to make it easier on ourselves. Either way will give you the correct answer. But in the problem, they are giving us the conversion for gallons to cubic feet squared. So we want to leave it in feet. All right. So let's leave it in feet. All right. So let's first solve for the volume of this in feet cubed. So volume equals pi r squared height. Volume equals pi times r, which is 0.5 squared, times the height, which is 1.25. Okay. I'm going to do these calculations off screen. 0.5 squared is 0.25 times 1.25, which is 0.3125. Pi. So 0.5 squared times 1.25 is 0.3125. I did not round that. That's the actual answer to that part of the problem. And then the pi goes on the back. Okay, now we need to, so this is the answer. Feet cubed, right? So now we need to figure out how many gallons is that many cubic feet. So they gave, in the problem, they gave us the conversion. They said that 1 foot cubed is equal to 7.5 gallons cubed. So that information is given. So we're going to use that information to figure out how many cubic gallons this is. And the way you do that is you set this up like so. 0.3125 pi feet cubed equals, now we're going to set it up as a ratio, as a proportion, equals this 7.5 gallons cubed is to 1 foot cubed. Okay. And when you're doing this at home, you're going to do it the same way I'm doing it here, okay? So I'm basically, so if this equals this, if these two things are equal, then if I divide them, what do I get? And I'm sorry, this should not be an equal. This should be a times. multiply. Okay. What is 7.5 gallons cubed divided by 1 foot cubed? Well, if they're the same thing, if you divide something by itself, you get 1, right? And if you multiply anything by 1, does it change it? No. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm multiplying this number times 1. All of this equals 1, okay? So I'm multiplying this number by 1. But when I do that, watch what happens to the units. So ignore the numbers, we're just looking at the units, okay? First of all, what's the denominator of this one? Just 1, okay. You can add that or not, it doesn't matter. So what is feet cubed and feet cubed? What happens to those? Well, they cancel. Now what we have to do is multiply this number times this number, and we'll have it in cubic gallons. Equals 7.5 times 0.3125 pi. And you get 2.34375. Gallons cubed. So, if you get a gallon problem on your homework, which I don't remember if I assigned one of those or not. Let me look. I don't think I did. I'm pretty sure I did not. Okay, yeah, I don't think I did. So you should be alright with that. But anyways, in the future, you might be given a problem where you have to convert it to a different unit at the end, and this is how you do it. You take your answer and you multiply it by the conversion, by the what they tell you, and then that'll give you your final answer. Okay? Alright, that's all. Thank you guys for coming. Your homework will be assigned in 15 minutes, and this lesson will be up shortly. If you have any questions, please stay and talk to me, otherwise you're free to go. Deuces.